Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of your favorite 3M channel. And for tonight, I'm especially pleased and honored to welcome our new friend and brother, Sebastien Richard. And I'm just gonna say a couple of things before he exposes more stuff about his past and what is his passion. Sebastien is a Bible teacher, author, entrepreneur, and he's the founder of the Thriving on Purpose Ministries and Wild Remnant Publishing. I'm so thankful that, brother, you had time for myself and for our guests to come tonight and to speak about very important and interesting topic when it comes to the whole earth. Welcome, and can you please share something with the audience when it comes to your work, background, and spiritual and theological formation?
All right. Okay. Wow. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for having me on the show, Nicola. Um, I'm just a little bit about me. Back in 2015, I had I guess you could call it a midlife crisis. I had a wake up call from God. I prefer calling it a wake up call from God, where I decided to make something of myself. I remember at the time my wife always said, "When are you going to start using your 12-pound brain for other stuff than just a 9 to 5 or whatever?" So decided to train myself in personal growth. I joined the John Maxwell team. I became a leadership coach, an expert. I began writing. It was a passion of mine. I always wanted to become an author since I was like 20 years old. But I guess you could say it took me 20 years to believe I could do it. But when it was time, it was time. So I started writing, started publishing, and I really, God used that season in my life to really grow by leaps and bounds. I embraced personal growth. It was a first for me in my life because previously I have been a Christian since I was like 9 years old. So I was all about spiritual growth. So learning the scriptures, growing with God and all that. But I was a big zero when it came to personal growth. And they're basically two wings of the same bird, but I was trying to fly with only one wing. And God showed me the error of my ways and brought me a little bit later in life. It was, like I said, I was past 40 years old, but it was a huge transition for me. So as I grew, I was like, man, people have to know about this stuff. Like they have to grow their leadership. They have to embrace not just spiritual growth, but personal growth and faith. And like, so there were so many good things that I wanted to teach people. So my wife and I, she also joined the John Maxwell team, by the way. She also became a coach. So together we joined forces and we started a podcast. I did that for maybe 3 or 4 years. You can check it out on our YouTube channel, the Thriving on Purpose podcast. Just write Thriving on Purpose. You'll find us on YouTube. There's like 300 videos where we teach people all kinds of stuff pertaining to leadership, faith, and personal growth. But at the same time, I'm a guy, a little bit of I guess you could say a Renaissance man. So I'm passionate about a lot of stuff. And I've always been passionate about conspiracies, ancient texts, and research. So this is kind of more what we're going to be talking about tonight. And I kind of like put that on the back burner for some time, for a few years, until I started again wanting to delve into these things. So last year, so far I've written 11 books. I'm working on my 12th book right now, but I don't have, and that's kind of like a little weakness of mine. Usually people, they're going to write in kind of one lane and make a name for themselves as they write one book after another, all in the same lane. So they gather an audience. People know them for that lane. Me, I'm passionate about a lot of stuff. So I've written my book writing has been a little bit discombobulated. So there's been many different titles and many different lanes. I love writing books that help people, obviously. But last year I wrote a book. It was a novel. It was my first novel. So it was about Bigfoot. And then after that experience, which I really, really enjoyed, I was like, maybe I should publish books that have to do a little bit more with the conspiracy world. So I was kind of going back gradually to my roots. So cryptids, conspiracies, ancient texts. So I was like, okay, let's go back to that, because I've always loved those things. So I decided to publish a version of the Book of Enoch, and I was like, the best way to do that would be to offer it in large print. So I published a large print version. It's been doing really well. And then after that, I was like, maybe I can offer another kind of book that has to do with conspiracies, and which brought me to the book we're going to talk about tonight, The North Pole and Inner Earth Chronicles, which is basically an amalgam of two works. And so I didn't write the book. I just wrote the introduction, and it's pretty short. But I just wanted to bring to the public two works put together. So the Smoky God, written by Emerson, and the Secret Diary of Admiral Byrd, which are two, I would say, controversial works, because people are not sure they're authentic. People are not sure that, did this really happen? Is it just a novelization? Is it just an adventure tale, or did it really happen? But I still found the two tales absolutely like mind-blowing. And I thought they had a lot of tie-ins to what we read in scripture as well. And I just wanted to give that to people, because I noticed that I looked at the versions that were already existing online. I was like, you know what? They're not that great, and I don't want to diss anybody who's been, but some people, sometimes they just publish a work that's a public domain, and they do it a little bit fast, and it's not like, so I wanted to offer a product that was pretty good, that offered the two books put together in a good quality format. And I think it's mission accomplished. I did fairly good with that book, and people appreciate it so far. It's been doing well. So yeah, it's fascinating accounts. So we're going to talk about that tonight: Inner Earth, the Hollow Earth, and all that stuff.
Hey, thank you so much for the lengthy intro. I just have to say that I appreciate your passion and how different topics make you this diversified researcher slash author slash speaker. And even if by your own admission, this may lessen the number of books being sold, but still, I don't see it as something negative. To me, that's amazing that someone can be open-minded when it comes to different topics and just different fields of research. Um, I read this book throughout the week. It was not a difficult read. It was not a lengthy read. So anyone who may be concerned, because we cover a lot of theological and academic books on the channel, I just want to tell you, please support the work of Brother Sebastien. His Amazon link is in our video description. Book is really, really affordable, and you will learn what was one of the conspiracy slash mysteries that started happening since the beginning of the 20th century, that were leading even to the middle and 60s of the last century. And again, these topics are still being talked about. There's still many unresolved mysteries surrounding these two stories. But Sebastien, before we start diving more into the stories, can you please tell us what is actually the theory of the hollow earth?
Yeah, well, see, and I mean, in recent years, and I talk about it in the introduction in the book, in recent years, since about 2015, people, I mean, unless you've been living under a rock, there's been a lot of resurgent of something that's been ancient and something that has been forgotten and not talked about for centuries, is the shape of the earth. So there's now we have flat earthers in Christendom. So there's people who believe the earth is a globe, and there's people who believe that the earth is flat. And there's a lot of discussion going around with the shape of the earth. And one of those discussions that was always underlying about the shape of the earth is the earth hollow? So we know that we have an earth's crust, but what is underneath that crust? That's the discussion that's been going on. And there's works out there that, not just the two that were compiled in this book that I offered the public, but there's other works as well that talk about inner earth realms. And not just like we would maybe think normally, if you're not familiar with inner or hollow earth, you would think, well, it must be very dark. It must be like this. It must be like that. But no, inner earth realms, when they're described in those manuscripts or writings or books that have been written about the lore of it, they're pretty majestic and quite impressive. And usually the civilizations that are found underneath our surface world, according to those theories, are quite advanced. And that's what I found was very, very fascinating and was an interesting tie into the biblical narrative, was who are those people? Who are those civilizations? And there's multiple theories. I mean, because when you're talking about biblical cosmology, whether is the earth a globe or is the earth flat, you have certain perimeters that's going to be limiting the discussion to what it actually looks like. Whereas when you're talking about inner earth, there's so many more rabbit holes you can go in, or can of worms that you can open, because there's more conjecture, there's no definite concept of what exactly is inside the earth, if anything. Some people might be like, well, there's no such thing as the inner earth, and there's nothing under there. It's just magma and lava and the earth's core, and that's it. But when you read the accounts offered by Olaf Jansen and Admiral Byrd, for instance, the two books that we're going to discuss a little bit tonight, you got it. It brings you to scratch your head and think a little farther than that, and think, are we talking about an actual underground world, or did they go through some kind of portal that brought them in another dimension? I mean, there's so many, like I said, conjecture and theorizing that can be attached to that subject. It's absolutely fascinating. And before I went on with you tonight, I was talking about it with my wife, because my wife she's good at making me think outside the box. She's good at conjecturing. She actually offered a couple theories. I went like, man, that would make a good book or a good movie. She was offering some theories about who these people are and how those civilizations came to be and all that. And so the hollow earth, yeah, and it's not just in the book I talk about the North Pole, because that seems to be the rallying point of both accounts in the book. But there's other places that would be deemed possible entry points into the inner earth. One of that is the kingdom of Shambhala, which would be more in Tibet, under the earth. And there's even talk about at the other end of the globe, if there it is indeed a globe, that would be in Antarctica. So there would be an opening at the north and an opening at the south as well. And there's also that we're going to discuss later as we keep talking about this, maybe the possibility of other lands. So is the map of our Earth is what we're shown? Is it all there is as land, or is there a possibility of more land on the outside world, not just on the inner world, which is an interesting topic in itself. I've been watching a series recently on Apple TV. We took a free 3-month. We have it free for 3 months, so we started looking at Monarch, which is like Godzilla. It's a Godzilla themed series. And it's interesting in that series because they say that the Titans, they call them Titans, so Godzilla, King Kong, and all those creatures, that they're living under the Earth's crust in another realm, and that the way they come up on the surface is through a portal. And they try to identify where these portals are situated on the Earth. So I thought that was an interesting viewpoint that the author of the one who writes the show came up with, and it makes for an interesting concept to think about.
Yeah, I have to say that when I started researching a little bit about this topic and thinking about the underworld, of course, if it's true, I don't know. I was thinking also about that TV show. I was like, man, this came in the perfect timing because Monarch just came out. I forgot they have like 10 episodes, and I really enjoyed the show. I can't wait for the sequel, for the season 2, and especially, I don't want to spoil it, but especially how season one ends, like it gives you so many possibilities. Like, okay,
Yeah.
what happens next? Oh, sorry, you have to wait. Like, dang
Yeah.
it. Like, okay, I'll wait. But it's like it's so much interesting how this, this theory just has it can go so many different ways.
But one thing, just want to, I don't want to cut you, but I just want to bring something just for the viewers watching your podcast right now. It's interesting because they call the show Monarch. So this has done something in Google searches. If you research Project Monarch, which is what they refer to it in the show, now you start getting more ranking for that particular fiction show, or science fiction, I should say. And the real Project Monarch, which had to do with mind control, is harder and harder to find online as a result. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think they called it Project Monarch to try to override it a little bit online to try to hide the real Project Monarch, but that's for another show.
Yeah, I just want to ask you, in your research about this topic, have you ever found well, not just when it comes to the Smoky God and Richard Byrd's Secret Diary, but also when it comes to any authors and writers of this topic, especially from the last century, have you ever found any scholarly or academic backup, support, sources, be it religious or secular, doesn't matter?
You know, not really. And I think it has to do with the fact that it's so extraordinary and on the supernatural realm and outside of the realm of mainstream science. That would be the reason. I think anybody who would have been in mainstream science who would have brought forth that theory or embraced it might have lost their job or might have ended up with less funding or whatever it is that, then you got to follow the money when you're working for these guys, right? So I think that would explain the reason why there's no like reputable sources for this kind of information, like any other conspiracy theories or supernatural accounts. Uh, like it's not backed up usually by the big name scholars or the big name theorists out there. What about
Thanks.
you? Have you find anything that had to do with that?
No, I haven't. That's why I will. But you've been researching this
Well,
longer
I
than me.
find
So that's why.
if you want, I can share. There's a couple of books I found, but they're not by any um, big names or anything. But a couple of books that I found on a website
Yeah,
that were
please.
recommended about the subject of Hollow Earth, aside from the one that we're talking about tonight, that seemed really really interesting. But and that's the thing that I find with the Hollow Earth, it attracts all kinds of different kinds of thinkers. So you got Christian fringe theorists like you and me that are attracted to the subject, but you also have New Agers who are all about Shambhala and all the stuff tied into Buddhism that are also attracted to it. And you have occultists. And when I say occultists, I'm not talking about Satanists or demon worshippers here. I'm saying occultists in the sense the word occult means hidden. So when I'm talking about occultists, those who like to research hidden theories and things, but more from a, I guess, spiritual perspective, more new agey a little bit, or maybe more detached, more as we're interested in that kind of stuff, but we're not religious in any way, shape, or form, so we don't adhere to any. But they're still researching that kind of stuff. I saw a couple of good YouTube videos that talk about that stuff. But again, like you're gonna find all kinds of information. And you know what? When you're in those stages, the problem with us as believers, as Christians, is oftentimes we use the lens of Scripture only. And it's not the fact that we use Scripture as a lens; it's the fact that we use our own interpretation of Scripture as a lens that really boxes in what we can actually find as information. Uh, they're pretty rare, the Christians who are going to be willing to say, well, I want to look into this book because it talks about an account, let's say, about the inner earth, but the guy was a Freemason, or the guy was an occultist's an occultist, and I don't really agree with his beliefs. So sometimes we box ourselves in, and we got to be careful with that. We got to be careful with going all out as well as, embracing anything, having an anything goes mentality. Solomon did that. It didn't end well with him. So he had an anything go. He was very curious. He loved to study all the hidden things, and he had the wisdom to go with it. But he went too far, and he ended up falling miserably on his face as a result. So we have to be careful not to go to either extreme of either being too closed-minded and, oh, well, it's not in the Bible, so it doesn't exist, to the other extreme where you go too far and then you end up maybe losing what the expression would say, losing your religion in the process.
Yeah. So, do you remember those couple of book titles? Because I
Yeah,
already bought a
can
couple of them.
I share them in the comments? You have if I join the chat, would that work?
Yeah.
So maybe
I just want to say until you find your books, this is one of the book that I found, The Whole Earth, which I honestly do not recommend, but I still wanted to buy it and research. And another one whose cover page we lost, but seems to be more scholarly. It's I just opened it. I also got it recently. I didn't go deep into that, and it has amazing reviews on Amazon. So, but again, since I didn't go through that book, and for this one I only read the introduction and the first chapter, I can't really recommend what I didn't read. So these are the two books and yours that I know.
I'm gonna share with you and your audience there's a few links there that I provide, and I hope they can see them. There you go. You see them?
Yeah, you send in the private chat, but if you click in comments, the first icon on the right,
I'm sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
I just have to connect there, or
well, you just click on comments and then you wait. Let me see.
Well, I can't. Yeah,
Let me see. Okay, I copied and pasted. Okay.
Because I can't go in. It says connect to YouTube. Connect your YouTube account to join the live chat. So okay, so I'd have to be on YouTube at the same time, I suppose, or.
Don't worry, I got your message through the private chat, and I just
maybe we'll do it that way. Just copy paste it and bring it in.
Yeah, I pasted. It went through several messages because it couldn't fit at once. But what you sent to me, it's right there, so people can click and learn.
Yeah,
thank you for that.
There's good websites out there. Some obviously you have to chew the grass, spit out chew the hay, spit out the grass, or chew the fish, spit out the bones, whatever suits you. But you gotta be selective, and use the Holy Ghost as your guide, and it'll be okay. But there's some good information out there. It's not because it's from an outside source that's he's not a Bible scholar, or he's not a Christian, that it's necessarily bad or something you should avoid. And that's how I do research, and you always have to trust the Lord in that, and follow your gut at the same time.
Yeah, before I ask you a question, if we can briefly summarize these two books, I wanted to say something that encouraged me to say, just because you mentioned it, so then it crossed my mind. I can partially correlate to what you said. It's frustrating if, for example, I want to research this topic. That doesn't mean that I believe everything written there. I wasn't there. I don't know. But I cannot be always extremely skeptical and extremely judgmental, just rejecting everything just because it sounds too fantastic or to me insane. Hey, brother, we got this. Okay, we got a hi from this brother who's making Christian table RPG games, if I'm correct. So I share your frustration, Sebastien, because sometimes as a Christian follower, but also researcher, what if I want to research this topic? Then you'll be immediately mocked. Oh, are you one of those people? Do you really believe in that? So when it can come up in the topic of cryptids, giants, UFOs, or now Hollow Earth, I don't know what is true, but I would like to know. I'm curious mind. I want to be deeply rooted in Christ, of course, but I am not satisfied with just going to church, sing hymns or songs, worship God, put him on in the basket, sometimes volunteer and go home. I want to know more. I want to research. I want to, and what I learn, if I believe to be true, I want to share with others, right? So I find that frustrating as well, because sometimes you feel like it's almost embarrassing if you tell to others, "Oh, I'm reading on." It can be whatever. It can be, let's say, Egyptian pyramids and other pyramids. If they're somehow connected, could it be the same thing that made the ancients build them? What was their purpose? How did they build them? Could it be some ancient technology? Could the giants help them? If you say something like that, you're immediately weird and like, do you believe in that? I don't know what I believe. That's why I want to study. But you feel like
Exactly.
you can't even tell everyone, because even Christians, because you will be judged and misjudged just because you have curious minds. So I don't like that. I wish, yes, like you said, that we're on guard and led by the Holy Spirit, but that we can also go beyond the Bible. Not as these things are on the same level of authority as the Bible, of course not. But God didn't reveal the history of the universe and Earth in 1,000 pages. So if we go and investigate about different things, I don't think it's bad or evil. I think it can help us see so many small points so that we can see God as even more supreme in this big picture. So I don't know if this is something you would agree with.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%. And sometimes, you're going to connect the dots from the scripture. There's stuff in the Bible, even in the Bible still, that we still don't understand. That's very confusing. And sometimes by going in outside sources, in other books, either extra biblical text or other ancient manuscripts or ancient sources or other people who give information in their books or videos or whatnot, can help you connect the dots in your own understanding of God's creation, biblical understanding, and all those things. So I try not to limit myself. Obviously, I'm not going to go in and study I don't know, Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible. Although I know what's in it because I've heard it from some people giving testimonies. But the point is, there's certain things you don't want to touch, ideally, because you could attract some stuff you don't want. Let's just put it that way. But there's other stuff that I'm more than willing to tackle, and having discussions with people who of different beliefs or backgrounds. I'm not going to limit myself for those things either, because sometimes they can bring a unique perspective that makes you understand even better than when you limit yourself with, well, this person's not a Christian, so I'm not going to talk to them. Well, sometimes it can help you to understand more outside the box, the bigger picture.
Yeah, I want to attest to what you said about not touching something that you can see clearly as occultic or evil. Or I came in touch with the Necronomicon a few
Yeah.
months ago, but I didn't want to go beyond the introduction. I just wanted to read the introduction to see what is the mind behind the rest of the book, because a lot of stuff there, a lot of material covered in that book has to do with spells and incantations and summoning the ancient ones.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't want to even read them.
No, you don't want to
It
read
doesn't have
those
to be
parts.
loud.
But the
Even my
introduction will
like,
give you a pretty
yeah,
good grasp of, okay, what does it talk about?
yes,
What is that?
correct. So that's why I just read the introduction, got rid of the book. And what taught me in the introduction, even though the author of the introduction is not the same as the author of the book, but I could see their clear anti-Christian agenda and how they would see, for example, the cult of the so-called god Cthulhu, that even though I used to think, oh, this is just an imaginary deity in Lovecraft, but no, actually the ancient Sumerians used to believe in a similar deity. So that helps me to correlate, to think that not everything written or made up in fiction is fiction. There's sometimes a deeper
Yeah.
nefarious roots behind these things, and if we are ignorant, like I was about so many things, we would just think, well, it's just a book or just a video game, it's just a movie. Sometimes it is, but sometimes there's a real entity, a real story behind that, and we are not aware of that. So I was like, okay, let me try to memorize and learn about the introduction and get rid of the book, because I don't want to read about spells.
Yeah, exactly. And there's more and more of that too, behind movies, I mean, it's inevitable. You watch a movie and you see all the occultic symbolism and all the ancient beliefs or that they're trying to push on you. Like, the agendas are endless. I mean, when I watch a movie or a TV series now, I see it left and right, and they just push it everywhere. whether it's occultism, whether it's outright Satanism, or the woke agenda, or whatever. It's right there in our face now. They don't hide it at all.
Okay, I enjoyed the introduction. And if someone is right there complaining, oh, you went 30 minutes introduction. Yeah, that's how it goes when you have these friendly, nerdy conversations and you just go from one topic to another and you forgot and you're like, oh, we didn't even start. That's what it happens, but I really enjoy it. Brother, can we quickly summarize and then we'll talk in greater lengths? What is the book, The Smoky God, which was written by Willis George Emerson? Maybe if you can summarize it within a minute or two.
Yeah, so Willis George Emerson was an author who was contacted by Olaf Jansen, who liked the way he wrote, who liked his work. And Olaf Jansen was, I think, in his late 80s or 90s, very old man. And he was, he knew his time had come. But he had something on his chest that he wanted to get off his chest. And he decided to contact that man. So Willis George Emerson went to meet with Olaf Jansen, who was very frail and old. And Olaf Jansen started opening up about a trip he took with his dad as a youth. They had a boat, a fishing boat, and they went, him and his dad, they were they were Norwegian. So, and they took onto the sea, and they went on a fishing trip that brought them farther and farther north. And they kept going, and they passed the point where it was like past some icebergs and everything. And they had reached such a northern point where they ended up in a realm that they never thought they would see in such a cold temperature, where they entered that realm of the inner earth, and they met there with a civilization that was highly advanced, and they were giants. So that's the interesting part for me about the Smoky God, is that they spent some time there. Was it 6 months or a year? I don't remember exactly from the book, but
yeah, I think it was between a year and a two. And what struck me, he said that even though it was around North Pole, but when they were approaching this unknown civilization, it became warm.
There you go. And the temperature was very temperate and wonderful, and like there was beautiful landscapes. And they spent time with these giants who were not hostile. So that threw me off a little bit, because when you study the Nephilim and all that stuff, and you read Enoch, and you're like, oh, the giants, they're bad news. Not in that account. They weren't bad news. They basically had a counter-cultural exchange, where during those months that they spent there, they were their guests, they exchanged. So they were asked a lot of questions about the surface world, where they came from, which I found interesting, that civilization, that advanced civilization, didn't know much about the surface world. So they were asking them, and they were exchanging back and forth and learning from one another. And so he talks about that, and he talks also about coming back. And then his life took a turn for the worse when he came back. Olaf Jansen, he ended up in jail. An uncle of his thought he was nuts, and anyway, it didn't go well. He ended up in jail for a while, and then he learned the hard way. Because when he came back, he was enthusiastic. He was like, I got to tell my family, I got to tell my friends, this is crazy what I lived with my dad, and blah, blah, blah. And so he opened his mouth, and he talked too much, and it got him in big trouble. So after that stint in jail, and when he was released, he moved to the United States, and there he lived a more quiet life, where he didn't really talk about anything that he had seen until that time where he was older, and he was like, the world needs to know this. I can't just die with this information inside of me. I have to get it out in the world. And he chose Willis George Emerson to write it all down, which the man did. And it became the book known as The Smoky God, Voyage to the Inner Realm of to the Inner World. So that's the account that is shared in the North Pole and Inner Earth Chronicles, which is absolutely fascinating. Of course, there's a lot more detail than what I just said, but that's the crux of the book.
I just want to add one very important topic, if you
Go
allow
ahead.
me. Please.
Yeah.
I found it fascinating that Olaf and his father were still worshippers of old Scandinavian gods, Odin
Yeah.
and Thor. Yet, Olaf testifies then when he visited this supposed underground civilization that they were worshippers of Yahweh. But he didn't say Yahweh; he said Jehovah, and
Hmm.
they showed extra hospitality, kindness, and even escorted them back safely. And I'm thinking this is a very interesting detail, but we'll go back to that in
Absolutely.
details a little bit later. I just
Yeah.
want to add this because this is I
It's an
found it
important detail. Yeah,
fascinating.
and they were, so they had the beliefs of that they had in Norway back in the day. Yeah, the worship of Thor and Odin and all that lore. But it was still interesting that they were able to recognize that Olaf Jansen was able to recognize elements from Scripture, and he integrated them in the book, talking about Eden, talking about the four rivers that connected in Eden, and all that. So there's a lot of stuff shared there, and that's another example of, some people would be like, some Christians might be like, oh well, if you believed in Thor, I'm not going to read this book. This is crap. Well, that's too bad. And now for the secret diary of Admiral Byrd, which is also included in the book, that's a much shorter account, but fascinating nonetheless, about Admiral Byrd, who went on an exploration. He was supposed to fly over the North Pole. His assignment was he was supposed to drop down some flags, basically as a proof that he flew over the North Pole from east to west or north to south, or I don't know what, but he had to fly over all of it. And according to the newspapers, the the exploration itself was a failure because the flags weren't dropped and blah blah blah. There was things missing that kind of like did not confirm that his exploration was a success. Nonetheless, Admiral Byrd jotted down in his personal diary some very important and interesting details about what happened in that flight, which is reminiscent a little bit of when we have accounts of people. Remember, you're probably familiar with the Bermuda Triangle, when planes or said they approached the Bermuda Triangle, what their compasses, the compasses go crazy. So Admiral Byrd completely lost the north, literally, with the compasses going nuts. And he ended up being escorted by UFO type ships that had swastikas on them. So right there, like a lot of people be like, "What? Say what? The Nazis were there?" Well, no, not really, not really. The Nazis took it from these people, probably being inspired by whatever accounts. But the symbol itself is not evil. Is what we're familiar with is a different story. But the symbol itself in that account that has nothing to do with anything evil. So Admiral Byrd is escorted to this land where he saw he's flying over and he sees a woolly mammoth. So he was in shock when he saw that. There was green grass, so it's not supposed to be green grass at the North Pole or where he was flying at. It was really supposed to be just ice. And he's brought down and he meets these people, and then they're extremely advanced. He meets their ruler, and the whole time that I read it and I listened to it on audio, and the whole time, like, was this Jesus? Was this, who was he meeting exactly? But it wasn't Christ, I don't think, because although the man that he met, the people he met were advanced, they were they seemed to be very kind, very gracious. There was a lot of great qualities to them, and the ruler himself was very noble. But like my wife said, because I was talking about her about this particular account at supper time, she says, when you meet Jesus, it's Jesus. Christ has such an impact that Byrd would have said, I met Christ, I met the Lord, because it's transformative. So he met a noble ruler over there, came back with this amazing account of what he saw and what he encountered, and it was not very long; it's a few pages long. But I don't think it's Jesus Christ. So of course, it can be argued, and I talk about it in the introduction to the book. There's all kinds of theories about who that civilization was, and it seems to be a different. And that's what's interesting. They seem to be a different people than who Olaf Jansen and his father met. They're not giants, so that's interesting. They're tall, but they're not giants. So are there different realms? That's another thing, another can of worms we can open there. So once you go in the inner earth, is it like the outer crust, the outer world, where we have different realms, right? We have different races of man all over the globe, depending on the territory. So is it the same thing with the inner earth? And I wanted to discuss that, if you'd allow me, because I took some notes before I came on the show. There's a few things that I wanted to discuss about these things. I took notes. Let me just check here. Yeah.
Until you find your notes, I wanted to say that initially I named the episode Agartha, and then when I saw I don't have time enough to study about Agartha, which is another underground realm, specifically Asian and Buddhist, I deleted that name, and I'm like, let me just focus for now on this book. And when it comes to Agartha, I can do that episode, in the future. Yeah,
Agartha, I looked into it a little bit because obviously it's tied into this subject. It's interesting because it has more to do with Tibet, because it would be accessible through there in the mountains of Tibet. And apparently there's some accounts that may indicate that some people might have found the inner world, the inner kingdom of Agartha, which Shambhala, I think Shambhala is the capital city of Agartha, and it has it's connected more to I guess Eastern thought, that particular kingdom of Agartha. But it's still inside the earth. It's an inner realm as well. I don't know if you've ever heard the testimony of Phil Schneider and the Dulce base.
No, but I watched the documentary about Agartha like a month or 2 months ago, and it was very about New Thought, Theosophy, and this supreme ruler underground who is nothing like Jesus and Yahweh from the Bible. So it seems very
more esoteric, more Eastern philosophy related, but interesting nonetheless. If you look into it, there's obviously some documentation about that. So it could be, like I said, one of the territories that's found in the inner earth. Another interesting thing that a lot of people seem to have found is the possibility of alien beings under the earth. So Phil Schneider is one of them. So Phil Schneider worked for the US government. He was a geologist, okay? And he was hired in a secret project where the US government was digging and building DUMBs, so deep underground military bases. So obviously, as a geologist, his skill and understanding and knowledge came in useful for that project. But in one instance where they were digging deep, I haven't listened to Phil Schneider, by the way, in the last 15 years, but when they were digging, they encountered alien greys, alien beings under the earth. And there was a war between the US military and these alien beings. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because like I said, it's been a while since I listened to him. I think there were 5 or 6 of his team, Phil Schneider, and he's the only one who survived. So all of his co-workers were killed. He was shot by some kind of blue energy beam by the aliens, but he survived, and he killed them with his gun. But he gives his whole testimony, and again, I can share the link. I have the link here. That's very interesting. So it has to do with the inner earth, but it's obviously not like the inner earth that we're talking about when we're talking about the accounts that we talked about earlier, but still inner earth. So that's one, and I'm sharing it here in the private chat if you want to relay it to your audience. And there's another thing that I'm going to ask you if you've ever heard about it. Have you ever heard about the deep borehole that was dug in Russia? It's called the Kola Super Deep Borehole. And it was a scientific drilling project the Soviet Union did It's quite a long time ago. I don't remember if it was in the 60s or whatnot. But they dug extremely deep, 35 kilometers deep, so 22 miles deep. And they sent a recording device down there to record the sounds that deep. And if your audience is interested, the sounds that came back were simply horrific. In some podcasts, they've been called sounds of hell. So I'm just gonna put the link here. I can write sounds of hell because gotta know what it's about.
You know what? Until you find the link, I have to say that years ago I heard about something similar. I don't remember details because I love learning, listening, and reading a plethora of different things.
There you go.
But I remember that in some countries, some scientists were digging deep, and what they heard underground were like, and some Christians were comparing that as souls who are trapped and waiting for damnation to hell because they heard human cries and screams.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah. And if you're gonna have chills. If you listen to that, you're gonna have chills. So it's apparently, again, is it really that? I don't know. I mean, but I'm sharing it nonetheless because it's interesting to research. It could be. I mean, it could be. So again, that's another thing that we would have under the earth, possibly, is the realm of the dead or hell or whatever other scriptural depiction of what's under the earth, right? So that's another thing that I wanted to share with your audience. Another one is called Mel's Hole. So Mel's Hole is a mysterious pit that some people have said that could be as deep as 80,000 feet. And it's located somewhere in the middle of Washington near Ellensburg. So I'm going to share that link, which is also possibly something they would be interested in when you're researching the topic of the inner earth, because again, it's under the earth, right? So Mel's Hole. Another one is, I think that's it. That covers it for now. Yeah, I didn't find the other clip that I wanted to share, but it's for another little bit of another subject.
I think this is more than enough. We gave them a bunch of books and videos, so this is enough for people to study for months.
Yeah, exactly. For me too, you know.
And most of my friends, they don't have desire or will or time, quote unquote, to do these things. So I think they'll be even scared when they see like so much.
Just
sources.
the sounds of hell should be enough.
Different. I like sources.
Yeah, me too. I'm very curious by nature, so that's the kind of stuff I like to dig. But you know, I have 3 children. I'm married. I get it. I mean, I'm limited with time, and I have to really be picky and choosy about what I'm going to study. And sometimes the stuff I study, my wife will like, seriously, you really need to look into that. I'm like, well, yeah, I'm curious about it. So sometimes she doesn't even like what I'm looking into. So yeah, you have to be picky and choosy. So back to you. Just guide this conversation where you want it.
Well, I think it's time for us to start covering the intro of your book, and then we'll do it in maybe, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then we can assess both of these books. I'm going to read a few of the things that I found super interesting in your intro, and maybe you can give comment to each of these sentences.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, page 9. This is Roman 9 of your intro. You said that the North Pole and Inner Earth Chronicles, therefore, stand as a testament to the union of speculative storytelling and documented exploration. I don't think there's much to comment on this because we said, especially you said in advance, that there's a lot of similarities between these two accounts, but there are also differences. So just to underline, what would be the couple or few of the similarities between these two stories?
Well, the similarities obviously is they're both at the North Pole. So both entry points to the realms they saw, both accounts, are at the North Pole. And number 2, they met with extremely advanced civilizations. So that's number 2. And number 3, it wasn't cold where they were. It was a very beautiful temperate climate. And so that would be number 3. Obviously, there's other correlations and parallels that we could probably jot down if I really took the time. But those 3 really stood out for me, and they were very interesting.
Yeah. You also said that page 11, both the Smoky God and the Secret Diary of Admiral Byrd discuss an advanced civilization accessed through the North Pole and found inside the Earth, which we already explained. Both accounts are also unquestionably refer to a mysterious inner Earth. So when we speak of hollow Earth, the synonym would be also inner Earth. I just want people to know. Then you quoted verse Exodus 24, which I'll read because it's short. It's God's commandment when God said to the Israelites, "You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth." And then you were talking shortly about what could be the earth beneath. Is that just, just when you're giving example of the Russian scientists and also American scientists, Western scientists, when they were digging in the hole for different purposes, like, are we talking about just a mere soil and then a lava or magma underneath, or it could be something more and then the water under the earth? And as we know, the scientists have discovered years ago that there is a vast ocean underneath the Earth's core that is supposedly as big, if not bigger, than all the oceans on the planet. So I don't know if there's anything that you want to say when it comes to this topic and Exodus 24.
Well, for me, it really, I think it's really interesting that Yahweh would mention that. Basically, he saw that men, or the Israelites, could be tempted to worship or to make a graven image of what would be found underneath the earth, which brings us back to the accounts. So in the accounts, Admiral Byrd and Olaf Jansen both meet with super advanced civilization. And Olaf Jansen, they're giants. So not only are they super smart and super advanced, but they're super strong probably as well. So it would be very easy for tiny little 6-foot men to worship, or to be tempted to worship, or to consider as gods or potential gods creatures that are 16 feet tall, which is the how tall he said they could be, those giants. I think it was between the females were 12 feet, or the females were 12 and the males, the tallest ones, were 16, something like that. So that's fascinating to me, that Yahweh made provision for potentiality of man worshiping what's under the earth. And another thing that, what sucks about writing books, Nicola, is you write the book, you publish it, you get it out there, you're super excited, and 6 months down the road, a year down the road, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, you look back, you're like, I wish I would have put that in the book. I wish I would have said it this way instead, or whatever, because we keep learning, we keep evolving, we keep changing. And the thing that struck me also is a famous verse for those who study Nephilim, Genesis 6:4. We're familiar with it. I've been familiar with it for 20 years, that verse. I've been studying the Nephilim, and I've been very interested in all that. Read the book of Enoch and everything. But it struck me maybe last month or something. Genesis 6:4 in the KJV. In the KJV, not the other versions, but in the KJV, it says there were giants in the earth in those days. It doesn't say on the earth. So I thought that was fascinating right there. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. It says in the earth. Is that a typo? Is that Old English? Because the other versions don't really phrase it that way. But then it says, and also after that. So could it be the possibility that because some of these giants were in the earth, that when the flood happened, maybe they were spared? Some of them might have been spared, or part of them might have been spared, or maybe they were all evil, because we saw that, we know that from the book, from Genesis, obviously, from the account of Noah and from Enoch, that God wiped out these creatures because they were vile, they were mean, they were evil. So and they were genetic aberrations. But is it possible that some of them weren't? And what would they survive? Would they be the, and also after that, we know there's Goliath, and later on, right, there's other giants that are found later on. So I always thought that was it. Okay, so and also after that, it was talking about these guys afterwards, Goliath and his brothers and the lion men of Moab and all that stuff. But I never thought that maybe there were giants in the earth that also after that would be there still. And it's interesting also how, as the verse ends, it says, the same, talking about these giants in the earth, became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Again, if you're familiar with that verse, you probably read it 100 times, but it kind of struck me differently. I was like, okay, well, the way the verse ends doesn't necessarily seem to mean that, heroes, mighty man, and some version says heroes of old, men of renown. Okay, maybe they were still evil and people admired them, or maybe could it be that some of them were not all that bad and somehow were preserved? Again, conjecture. I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
Hey, while you were talking, I was Googling for other Bible translations that could say that the Nephilim were in the earth. So besides KJV, I found a few more translations. American Standard Version also says in the earth. Aramaic Bible in plain English also says in the earth.
Interesting.
And also English Revised Version. So there are like at least 3 more versions that say they're not very popular. They're not, very well spread, but I found, like, besides KJV, not New King James, but the old King James, that a few more versions mention, in the earth. I would just have to say, since I don't read KJV, that this is new to me. I didn't hear about this passage in that translation. I don't know if it's just a form of speech, how you say in the land, like
Yeah.
in the land of Canada, because you're Canadian. In the land of Canada, there was a famine or there was a tsunami coming. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that would
Could be.
mean necessarily that is inside the soil, inside of the earth, or just the way of you
Of saying
explaining things.
abroad,
Yeah.
like spread
Yes.
abroad. Yeah.
Yes. So
Well, that would be my first interpretation, but I thought it struck me differently after I reread it, and I was like, wait a minute, could this be? Could it mean maybe?
yeah.
Another thing that struck me, that I don't know if we're there yet. No, we're not there yet. You were going to address something else before that, so I'll just follow your lead.
Cool. I open your book, and we're about to read and analyze some not verses, but some sentences from the Smoky God book. And by the way, it's like that book is 3/4 of the whole book, because
Yeah.
the secret diary of Admiral Byrd, it's only several pages or a few pages long. So let's read and analyze some very interesting sentences. Olaf, a person who was not following Jehovah or Yahweh, he was occasionally given, like you said, biblical examples to support what he saw, especially from the book of Genesis. And I found that fascinating, that someone who is self-identifying himself as a Gentile, as a heathen, and I don't mean to put him down because of that, but I mean that is what it is. Like, you're not a follower of God of the Bible. For example, he mentions on page 10, God created the earth, but for the within, and he put quote unquote within. That is to say, for its lands, seas, rivers, mountains, forests, and valleys, and general conveniences, while the outside surface of the earth is merely the veranda, the porch, where things grow by comparison but sparsely, like the lichen of the mountainside, clinging determinately for bare existence. Just before that, he quotes Genesis 1:1, and then he says, in his understanding, that God created the earth primarily for the life inside, and the outside, there's still life, there's still existence, there's still, beautiful landscaping, nature, but that's like of less importance, if I can speak that way. And it just made me think about this. I'm not saying I agree with this, But like, what do you think about this?
Well, it makes us, it gives us a different perspective. I was talking, like, again with Elizabeth, my wife, earlier, and we were talking about this, and it makes us look at it differently. It's like, who, first of all, again, question is, who are these civilizations and who are they in the eyes of Yahweh? How important are they? Because in the account of Olaf Jansen, he mentions the realm he's in, but he also mentions the 4 rivers that are found in Eden that are interconnecting with that realm. And he mentions, and the shocker came to me when he says that their capital city is called Eden. So I'm talking with my wife, and she says, could it be that when we were kicked out, when Adam and Eve were kicked out, that God repopulated Eden with another civilization that we just don't know about? And then I looked at Liz and I said, and what is their holy book and what does it say? So if that, so, and like you mentioned, they seemed to worship the creator God that we're familiar with from scripture. So it would be the same God potentially that created them.
Yeah, I wanted to add something, not necessarily. Of course, if this is true, I have no clue, and I'm not saying this is true. This is
Same
all a
here.
big what if. So if this really happened, and if this is really true, I don't think that God would create them again, because there's a theory that says that Adam and Eve were not necessarily first people, but first elected people that represented the humankind as priests who would come in the garden that represented the temple on earth to meet with God. And after they're banished, but they're also like other people.
Makes
Uh,
sense. Yeah, that's
so
biblical.
but yeah, so again, but this opens the door to another story, and we don't have time for that, but it's interesting.
It
Page
is.
11, and page 11 is fascinating because it just mentions what you said. He says, according to Olaf, in the beginning, this old world of ours was created solely for the within world. We're located in 4 great rivers. Again, this is biblical. And then this is fascinating. On the top of a high mountain, near the fountainhead of these 4 rivers, Olaf Jansen, the Norseman, claims to have discovered the long lost Garden of Eden. And for people who don't know this, and I didn't know this years ago, uh, Garden of Eden was located on a mountain, which Dr. Heiser explains, and which is mentioned in Ezekiel 28. That unlike popular view and thinking that we have nowadays, Eden was probably in a valley. It was, no, but it was actually on a mountain. So now, without knowing this info, maybe even knowing, but he has no personal agenda to back up the Bible as being a non-Christian or non-Jewish believer. So according to him, on a high mountain, he doesn't state the name, he found these 4 rivers and the long lost Garden of Eden. And I was like, dang it, this is biblical, because again, it just supports what the work of Dr. Heiser and others saying, yeah, just read Ezekiel 28. The garden was on a mountain.
Well, here's more conjecture that could align with all of this is, could that mountain possibly be Mount Zion, where the Lord would be living, and maybe at its basis or around it or in it or on that mountain would be that capital city called Eden, which would be the long lost Garden of Eden. And here's the interesting thing. I've been part of different groups online that have been discussing anything like from the shape of the earth to our ancient past to the possibility of a recent reset in the 1800s to the possibility of us not being awaiting the great tribulation and the return of Christ, but actually being post millennium, living in Satan's short season, and so on and so forth, and on and on and on. And there's all kinds of possibilities and conjecture that people are discussing online that is absolutely fascinating. But one of the things that stands out about the North Pole is, if we're keeping in line with what we just mentioned about the possibility that maybe the Kebra Nagast, not the Kebra Nagast, what am I saying? The Black Rock, the Rupus Nigra. Anyway, I think I put maps in the back of the book that talk about. Oh, where did I put that? the Rupus Nigra, is it called? Anyway,
I remember you mentioning like
it's a
Black
yeah,
Mountain.
a black rock. It's called Black Rock, or it means black rock. And if let's say, conjecture, if this were Mount Zion. Now, isn't it interesting that when we read in the Bible about the throne of God, where God sits, there's all these wonderful precious stones and colors surrounding him, right? Now, let's say, for the sake of hypothesizing, let's say that black rock is Mount Zion, and the Lord, in some way, shape, or form, would reside over there. That would make some sense to me, because when you consider the aurora borealis, when you're in the northern hemisphere and you see those colors in the sky, I know they have a scientific explanation, but they have a scientific explanation for a heck of a lot of things, and they're not always good. So when you see those blues and greens and reds, some people have conjectured in those groups, like I mentioned, that I'm part of, that this is God's throne reflecting through the heavens from the north. And another interesting thing that is about the north is how the compass always points north. It doesn't point east, it doesn't point west or south, it points towards the north. Again, pointing to that place that is filled with mystery, as we have seen by doing an overview of the book and the accounts. So this is conjecture. Some people have conjectured also that the camp of the saints could be actually there at the north, along with the throne of Yahweh and Christ, which would be absolutely mind-blowing. But there's these, like I mentioned, there's this possibility of other realms as well, because if you look at the inner earth or stuff that we know has been documented or testified by certain individuals, there's these dark creatures also under the earth, like the sounds of hell, like what Phil Schneider encountered. I've seen videos also online on YouTube of what's it called? It's a cryptid. It looks like it looks like a tall gray. The rake lives underground. That's another creature that lives underground. That's very creepy. There's the kingdom of Agartha and Shambhala, which is more towards Tibet. So to what extent, like, and it's interesting that you mentioned that maybe the inner world is richer than the our outer world, where we think we're, the ultimate. But maybe we'd be shocked to see how many civilizations are actually inside of the earth, because there's just two mentioned in this book, and they don't seem to be the same one. Although they do have similarities, they seem to be distinct one from another. So,
the way you're explaining this place, I'm starting to think, could Tolkien have, when he was writing about the Middle Earth, could he have been inspired by these
well,
things?
yes, absolutely. Tolkien himself said that he didn't say it wasn't fiction, but he said that he was inspired by what is actually in our planet. He said that he didn't he says inner earth. Actually, the quote is at the beginning of the book. I'm just going to read it to you guys. I wrote it at the beginning of the book. He wrote, "Most people have made this mistake of thinking Middle Earth is a particular kind of Earth or is another planet of the science fiction sort. But it's just an old-fashioned word, for this world we live in, as imagined, surrounded by the ocean." So Tolkien said basically that the inspiration he got for Middle Earth is from our own world. So what did he really know? I mean, we know Tolkien was a researcher and a guy who was interested in a lot of stuff. Uh, so what did he know about these realms? Possibly more than we think.
So wait, are you saying that one day I may wake up and go in the backyard and see a hobbit digging hole and coming out and saying hi?
Well, I mean, I don't know about Hobbit. I don't know about dwarf. There was the dwarves, the elves, the hobbits, but an interesting account I read online today as I was preparing for this show was one that someone had, and it's very vague right now, but I'm trying to recall. Someone had visited the realm of Inner Earth and was escorted out by the civilization there. Where he was escorted out through a some kind of portal, and when he came back to the outer world, he was in Kentucky, USA. So
Because they have the best chicken?
I don't know if he had a hunger for something, but but the point is, it's interesting. Like where, like, could it be possible that there's different entry points? And Mel's Hole is one of those that I think is fascinating. How deep it is. The borehole in Russia. The Bermuda Triangle is in the water, but it's still interesting to think about, is it possible? Because a lot of planes and ships are said to have disappeared in that area. Could they have simply gone through a portal? And are they over there today? Are they in those inner Earth realms somewhere? Possible. I don't know.
There's a question for you. Can you see it on the screen, or do you want me to
Yeah.
read it for you?
Arda was meant to be an Anglo-Saxon myth for the Brits. Not sure how it translates to Hollow Earth. Interesting thought. Does Sebastien think this is connected to Atlantis, Numenor somehow? I'm not familiar with Numenor. I know Lemuria, Atlantis. Atlantis is interesting. I think Atlantis might be. I believe it was in the Atlantic Ocean, and it might be connected somehow to the Bermuda Triangle. So maybe the remnants of Atlantis, when it did go under, might have caused a portal of sorts, or a supernatural interference when planes and ships go over there. Arda, I'm not familiar with Arda. I'm not familiar with Arda at all, so I need maybe some explanation.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Arda either, but Numenor is one of those kingdoms, islands in Tolkien's world.
Okay, Tolkien. Okay, yeah. So yeah, I only saw the movies. I didn't delve deep into Tolkien, so I didn't.
Okay,
know
so
about
Joshua
Numenor.
explains Numenor was Tolkien's retelling of Atlantis, the true west, where the lineage of Aragon was from, and Arda is the name
Okay.
of the world in Middle Earth. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks for that. Well, let me check here. Yeah. Tolkien retelling of Atlantis, the true West, where and I know that Tolkien. There's a reason why there's so much fascination with Tolkien's work from everybody. I think when a fiction work grabs the fascination of so many people, it's probably because there's so much elements of truth tied into it that resonates with our inner being, and that tells us there has to be something more. I feel there's like something more here that I'm missing, and I think that's the work of Tolkien had that effect on so many people. And it's interesting that he said himself that he basically took it from our own world, and he didn't invent that much about it. It was more like inspired by what he already knew exist or thought existed.
Yeah, and I also want to add one sentence. A lot of fantasy and fiction, works of fiction, it's not mere fiction or fantasy. A lot of that exists, and the authors, like yourself and others, just have, of course, their imagination allows them to edit some details, and then the book is usually portrayed as a mere fiction. But behind a lot of fictional stories, especially Christian fictional stories. There's a lot of truth packed there, but you have to be able to discern these nuances.
Yeah,
I
and
want
Narnia also is fascinating as an account. The world of Narnia, the way
yeah.
C.S. Lewis kind of packaged it, very interesting there too.
Mhm.
There's something else I wanted to share with you and your audience. I don't know if you have time or if you wanted to keep going.
I have time if you have time, but then we'll have to go to 2 hours if that's okay.
I just gonna try to share this. I was doing a little bit of research today, in line with uh, Isaiah 11. So Isaiah 11 talks about what we identified. Some people, some scholars identify. Oh, it's the millennium. Others think he might have been talking more about the new earth or heaven itself. You know, when he talks about the wolf shall lie down with the lamb. And now I'm not going to go into the Mandela effect where people remember it being the lion. I remember it being the lion shall lie down with the lamb, but I'm not going to get into that. I read it. It said the wolf, but it's it's an interesting passage because when we read it, well, okay, well that must be what heaven's going to be like, or what that the realm where God reigns is definitely is going to be like that. But there's verses 11 and 12. I'm going to read them to you. It's from Isaiah 11, verse 11 and 12. It says, "And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria and from Egypt and from Pathros and from Cush and from Elam and from Shinar and from Hamath and from the islands of the sea." And then verse 12, "And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth." Now, the word that I found interesting in this passage was the word ensign. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations. So I researched that word today. And I went in the Aramaic and Hebrew, and in Aramaic Hebrew, it's basically NEC, neck. Ensign equals neck. And it's pronounced nasi or nace, NACE. So it's a masculine noun. And it's very interesting because the definition says something lifted up, a standard, a signal, a signal pole, an ensign, a banner, a sign, or a sail. So, number one definition, a standard, and they put this in the definition of Strong's as a rallying point. As a rallying point. And we were talking earlier about the possibility of the North Pole being the home of the throne of God and maybe possibly the camp of the saints. So it's interesting because usually a camp is a rallying point when you're camping, and where you're the camp of the saints would be a point where they rally, they are gathered together. As the passage says, he will gather them from the four corners of the earth. And another thing that really struck me is the second definition, which the word they use in English is ensign for the nations. He shall set up an ensign for the nations, which is also known as a pole. Now, the North Pole, I find interesting sometimes studying why we name things the way we name them. Why were they called poles, right? Could it mean an ensign? Could the North Pole with its magnetic north and its northern lights be some sort of ensign from Yahweh for the nations to look up and see there's something at the north there? Again, conjecture, but I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, thank you for that. Let's continue. Page 12. So Olaf is continuing describing this land. He said he witnessed giant animals, and then where the people lived to be centuries old after the order of Methuselah. And I'm like, well, I know about his story that Olaf, since he was a young boy, he liked studying, he loved reading, different books. And again, even though he was the worshiper of Odin and Thor, he knew the Bible. So I was just impressed. So he said that these people lived old by the order of Methuselah and other biblical characters. This is a region where 1/4 of the so-called inner surface is water and 3/4 land, where there are large oceans and many rivers and lakes, where the cities are superlative in construction and magnificence. Now, this is very interesting passage. In the identical center of this vast vacuum is the seat of electricity, a mammoth ball of dull red fire, not startlingly brilliant, but surrounded by a white, mild, luminous cloud, giving out uniform warmth and held in its place in the center of this internal space by the immutable law of gravitation. This electrical cloud is known to the people within, as the abode of the Smoky God. They believe it to be the throne of the Most High. Well, it
Wow.
doesn't say God, but this is the biblical expression. Also, Muslims use the same expression when it comes to God, the Most High. Now, this is fascinating. So, suppose in the middle, in the center of this realm, there is this huge giant red ball that is I mean, even the scientist saying that in the core of the Earth there is this huge, very warm circle of whatever it called, represents. I don't know, but this is supposedly less hot than what the scientists are explaining, and there's a cloud covering um, this mammoth brilliant ball, and by the people of that area, this electrical cloud is known to the people as the abode of the Smoky God. So no one sees the God, no one depicts God, but this is supposedly the throne of the God. So I'm like, well, why do they even call it the Smoky God? Because first, God, it says not to be able to be seen. They saw Jesus in the Old Testament and in the New Testament whenever he appeared to them, but not Father God. So this whole concept is again very interesting, but I also got confused. Why would they think that the cloud has to do with being with the deity of God? Like, is it because can we parallel this with the Old Testament where God would sometimes show in His glory? He would be covered with a cloud, and there'll be
Yeah.
thunders and earthquakes and all of these things. I don't know. That's the closest that come to my mind.
Well, there's definitely what you just mentioned, but also in more modern times, sometimes we have testimonials, and there's assemblies where people will pray and they see the glory of God come as a sometimes a blue smoke, or kind of like a mist or a smoke that can appear in some sanctuaries when people gather sometimes, and the Holy Spirit really manifests with power. So that's another possibility. I was listening to it, and I was like, it kind of powers their whole city state, or it kind of like energizes everything. Tesla would have been in heaven. I mean, this is what he wanted to bring, free energy, right? And I believe that there's some elements to that make us realize that so many things were usurped on the surface world, that in those realms are freely available. It doesn't seem from these civilizations that they have any problem with energy, anti-gravitational vehicles, or like they seem to have access to a free source of energy that is limitless. And that's very fascinating to me, because again, we live in a world where the devil has deceived so many, and is occupying so much, and stealing so much from people. I think that the concept of free energy, they might have been living it every day. For them, it might have been completely normal. So that's interesting.
Yeah. Page 23, Olaf says, my father was an ardent believer in Odin and Thor, and had frequently told me that they were gods who came from far beyond the north wind. So he's somehow trying to connect this with this
Yeah.
realm that he discovered. Yet in this realm, at least in this part of the underworld realm, uh, if we believe in the hypothesis that there are like numerous civilizations on the world, like one would be through the Tibetan entrance, and they're more like believing in Eastern sort of religion, mysticism, gods. But in this realm that where Olaf supposedly entered, even though he and his father were believers in Odin and Thor, and these supposed gods came from the North Wind, um, Olaf is meeting these people who are twice taller than him, showing extreme dose of kindness, teaching them things. He's witnessing the way of they're communicating. I'm imagining the way he explains they're communicating were some advanced radios or talkie-walkies. They maybe we have them today, but 100 years ago they didn't have them.
Yeah.
I'm talking about us here on the surface of the planet. And then he's presented to this priest, and he speaks highly of him. We don't know his name, and then he just has freedom to leave and goes back to whenever. In the beginning, I was thinking, could it be this, that maybe God dwells with these people, that they're like, could it be that this is in a way paradise? But then I learned that these people had so many questions about the surface world to Olaf,
Mhm.
and I just understood that, okay, let's say that these people do exist, and let's say they're giants, but uh, these are not evil giants like portrayed in the Old Testament. These are very kind, more human-like, just very tall, who are
Yeah.
the worshippers of Jehovah. And because they're not omniscient, they had to ask Olaf and his father about of the affairs on the world. I'm like, okay, these are just, if they exist, they seem to be a regular, normal, but just super tall people who were kept in the idyllic Genesis surrounding with probably extra dose of oxygen. That's why everyone is tall, including plants and animals and people. So they're not the same Nephilim we see in the Bible, and these are not divine beings because they acquired knowledge from Olaf and his father. So they're not divine. They're just people who, if they exist, they just live in not other realm. They just live under the earth, but they're not divine.
Yeah, that's my thoughts too. I don't think they're divine, but I like just because the fact they were asking questions about the surface world, like okay, they're lacking some information here, so obviously they don't know themselves. Like they feel the separation too from us. So, but it's interesting how you mentioned that Olaf's father talks about Thor and Odin, and he's trying basically to grasp or wrap his mind around what he's actually witnessing, trying to make it make sense with his lens, the lens through which he views reality, the what he knows, what he's familiar with. And we all do that, right? Even us. Uh, when we're reading at accounts like this, we're trying to make it fit with the Bible, or we're trying to make it fit with what we already know. And well, could it possibly be this, or could it possibly be that? Could it also possibly be that it's just not mentioned anywhere in the Bible? That has nothing to do with what we're actually reading in our scripture, right? The scripture would actually be treating about just the surface world and what we had to deal with as human race, and that these realms have their own accountability to Yahweh himself on a whole different level, and we just don't know about them the same way they don't know about us.
Yeah, before I read something more, I want to say what Joshua said, that the molten core would be probably the equivalent of a sun to them. And I don't disagree with this. So even though they taught this to be as a seat or throne of God, it was probably nothing divine about this thing, the circular mammoth ball. It was just giving them energy, power, light, things of that sort, because they seem to be um, powered 24/7, and they were like I don't remember reading that all I've ever witnessed there was nighttime. So yeah, that's interesting. I also want to say
Yes.
I came to the page where I remember how he was witnessing that whenever he was picked up by their ships, he was mentioning that they're like silence. They don't produce noise when they will be moving, and they will move so graciously. They will move on one track, not two, like we have trains with two tracks, but like it will go on one track, and they're like so fast and so elegant. And then he was speaking about that these people talk different language, which he didn't understand always, but he had to learn eventually. I
Yeah.
mean, this is like, again, we don't know if this is true, but I think that a very cool movie can be made
Yeah,
out of this.
I was going to say that. If they were to adapt it in a movie, that would be awesome to watch. I mean, it would be a really cool adventure. Like, not like Gulliver's Travel, but on the same, in a similar way, but the opposite. Gulliver met with the small Lilliputians, but over there is giants. So, but it's interesting. It would make a really cool movie.
He says the great redwood trees of California would be considered mere underbrush compared
Yes,
with the giant forest trees extended for miles and miles in all directions.
that
We
was
heard
interesting.
much of a city called Eden, but were kept at Yahoo for entire years. So he was visiting and witnessing different towns, but this also name struck me, Yahoo. That's like so similar to Yahweh or Jehovah. I'm like, man, like this is like there's so many biblical connotations and parallels, like, and again, Olaf was not a Christian, so he had no reason to push this agenda. Like if I would go there, I can come up with a story to try to convert atheists or to try to imagine stuff, and just, because I have an agenda or I'm biased. But he had no bias in this regard. I just
No.
find it exciting. Like the second town was called Yahoo, so Jehu. So like so many biblical parallels.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I'm not mistaken, there is a biblical character named Jehu, huh? Jehu?
I tend to read Bible mostly in Serbian, so I'm
Okay.
not sure.
Yeah, I think there's a biblical character named Jehu. So that's interesting. Maybe the city was named after him. But when it comes to those trees that he mentions, that he says that California redwood trees would be like dwarfed by what he saw. It's interesting because in the book of Enoch, there's these gigantic trees that were cut down by angels. And now you can maybe make a parallel. So does that mean that our outer realm used to look a little bit like that, but it was changed? Now there are some theories that I've been acquainted with that do mention the possibility of um, remnants of these giant trees on the earth. The Devil's Tower in Wyoming that appeared in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That mountain, it looks like a tree stump. It looks like a giant tree stump. And I've seen other images of mountainous rocky structures on the earth that look like they might have been at some time in the past gigantic trees. So, and it seems that in that realm, these trees were in existence. They were still thriving for some reason. So that's super interesting.
Yeah, he's also mentioning how advanced they were in technology. He said, and when he was riding in one of these railroad cars, whatever they're not trains. He said on the top of each car were high geared flywheels lying on their sides, which were so automatically adjusted that as the speed of the car increased, the high speed of these flywheels geometrically increased. His host, which he names him as Jules Galdia, so his giant host, explained to us that these revolving fan-like wheels on top of the cars destroyed atmospheric pressure, or what is generally understood by the term gravitation. And with this force thus destroyed or rendered nugatory, the car is as safe from falling to one side or the other from the single rail track as it were in a vacuum. Again, who
Wow.
knows if this is true, but this is like for 100 years.
Oh,
If this civilization exists, they're probably even more advanced now. But for 100 years ago, this was amazing. Like just
this was incredible. Yeah, absolutely. Even today, to some degree, it would be like, wow. So yeah, for sure, what he witnessed was absolutely mind blowing, and it's understandable that he wanted to get it off his chest before he passed.
yeah, we're almost done with the Smoky God book. They're finally so Olaf and his father are finally introduced with this called High Priest. We don't know his name or identity, but again, I don't think this is Jesus or anything like that. It's just a tall human person. and Olaf and his father saying we would like to come back, and then the high priest replies with, "I fear you can never return,"
Hmm.
replied the chief high priest, "because the way is a most hazardous one.
Yeah.
Whenever you're ready to attempt a return voyage, I assure you that your boat, which is here on exhibition, shall be put in the waters for the river Hiddekel, one of those four rivers in Eden, at its mouth, and we will bid you Jehovah speed." I'm like, dang it.
Godspeed.
That's like
Yeah.
that's like today we say, but even in Star Trek and in sci-fi old movies and TV shows, when they say Godspeed,
Yeah.
but here it's used as Jehovah speed. And I'm like,
Jehovah speed.
it's like gives me these sci-fi vibes, but also like biblical, parallels. I'm like man, like again, I don't know if this happened. I don't know if this is true, but it's like we have here what we may call a heathen or a Gentile in different ways, verifying the Bible and the Judean and Christian belief in Yahweh as true. I just want to say that what you mentioned, when he came back in the meantime, his father had an accident and died. So young Olaf came back home. He told the story to his uncle, like you said at the beginning of the episode. He was locked for over 20 something years, and then out of fear he decided not to talk about this thing
Hey,
ever
who can
again.
blame him?
Yeah, until his life came to be, then he decided to open his soul, because, and I cannot blame him,
Yeah.
honestly, if this is all true. Like, he suffered for 20 something years being in prison, and I'm thinking, could it be that just because he was thought to be mad, or that his uncle would assume that he killed his own father? Like, I don't know.
Or maybe those in power didn't want his account to come out, so they kept him in prison and whatever, I mean, there's a lot of possibilities there for sure. One interesting point that you mentioned is when they're wished Jehovah's speed to go back and all that, and they are explained that you can't never come back. They're basically saying it was a freak accident that you guys made it this far. Like, it was virtually impossible. That's why the giants, when they were on that ship, when they first encountered them, they're shocked to see them. Like, what in the? How did you guys make it here? They're like, you can tell that when they have this first encounter with this civilization, they're on a giant ship, and they take them aboard, and they're talking amongst themselves, and they're like laughing, and they're like, what in the world? How did these guys make it here? So it was a 1 in a million chance for them to just navigating, using their little ship, that they were to make it that far up north through what they went through to get to that place. And so they knew if they went back, they could never come back, because they weren't going to make another trip back.
We have a very interesting question from our Christian friend who's making Christian RPG board games. He says, just had a thought. Do you think there could be any correlation to the Watchers who were bound in the earth? They wouldn't have access to see the world. That's a very interesting question. Because we know
Yeah.
in Enoch,
Yeah, and
and
Enoch, they are
Peter
bound.
explaining that they're in Tartarus, they're in prison
Yeah.
until their judgment, their damnation comes.
Yeah, I remember Tom Horn looking into this. The late Tom Horn, he passed away not long ago, but he had mentioned he had done a calculation looking into the Book of Enoch, and that prophecy when Yahweh is condemning them and saying that they're going to be bound under the earth, which is interesting that you would bring that up, I think. But that, according to Tom Horn, that he had done a calculation, and they were supposed to be unbound more in our day, according to the timeline and everything that he had looked into. But he could have been off as well, And again, it's interesting because could they be the Watchers? Could they be angelic beings? I don't know. I mean, it's a tough one. It's a tough question. I personally, I think not. For the reason that also, if we consider the Admiral Byrd story, they're not giants. So I tend to think more that there might be more than one different civilization under the earth, depending where they're situated. But
Yeah, I would say these are
anything
definitely
possible.
not the
We
Watchers
don't.
because these people, these giants have freedom to move, freedom to work, while the Watchers are clearly says they're chained and
Yeah,
they're like they know that their end is coming, so they don't have all these beautiful life of like I'm gonna
yeah, and I
work,
don't
I'm
think.
gonna have, and these people are able to marry and have kids
Yeah,
and extend their lives. So yeah,
and
these
I
are
don't
not the
think that
Watchers.
when they're unbound, that they're going to be like you said, living their best life and having a good old time. I think they're probably going to have some kind of agenda for some reason, that they're a mission, something they have to do, or they might be unbound for a purpose. I forget what the Book of Enoch says about that, but no, I don't think they were the Watchers. But again, it's interesting um, to consider, to think about. I remember there's a guy I listen to regularly. It's a cryptid podcast. It's called Sasquatch Chronicles, and the host is Wes Germer. And at the end of every interview he does with anybody who meets a Sasquatch, who has an encounter, he asks them every single time, what do you think Sasquatch is? And of course, there's no right or wrong answer. Well, when we're discussing stuff like this, there's no right or wrong answer. We're just hypothesizing this and just brainstorming, trying to exchange ideas. Your guess is as good as mine, really.
Okay, the last quick thing before we switch to Admiral Byrd's short diary, you mentioned in well, actually, you it's mentioned in your book by the author. I forgot his name. George Willis George Emerson. He
George
mentions
Emerson, yeah.
that yeah, he mentions that the description that Olaf gives in this world is not the only one. He mentions that there are similarities between the Smoky God account with a Miocene civilization or age, but also that this matches what Josephus, the philosopher and chronicler, he mentions that what is mentioned in the Odyssey or the Iliad, then what is mentioned throughout different myths and legends, throughout the whole planet, including some of the Chinese, civilization legends, or including Hesiod's Theogony, or more recent accounts, and so on and so on. So I just want to ask you. You can take 1 or 10 minutes, doesn't matter, as much as you have. When it comes to these parallels, have you ever studied to see if there is any parallel between what he said and what was written by the ancients, including the Miocene civilization?
Well, it's going to take, you said between 1 and 10 minutes. It's going to take less than 1 minute, because no, I have not studied these other accounts. I was even a bit surprised when I read that there's possibility of parallels between these other accounts, which is another thing that I might go down, look into maybe later, another time. But I have not delved into this stuff myself, so I wouldn't know about those similarities, if there are any.
Okay, so let's move quickly to Admiral Byrd's diary. First, I wanted to ask you, do we even know if his freshly found secret diary is genuine? Do we have any data?
Nope. I think that when the people who found it would be better equipped to answer that, about the genuineness of, was this really found in his stuff? Is it really? I think it is, because there has been a diary found of Admiral Byrd in those years, but the press, or what they basically don't talk about that particular part of it. So they talk about the other stuff that he was supposed to be doing, and how it was pretty much deemed a half success, or some even say it was a failure. The what he was supposed to accomplish, he was supposed to drop some flags. And I took some notes here. I'm just gonna go back here a little bit. And so uh Washington Post, the newspaper, they did an article that dates from May 8th, 1996. And if I'm not mistaken, that's when the diary was found. Byrd's claim to have flown over the North Pole was controversial in its day, for one reason, because he failed to drop the hundreds of American flags he carried to prove his priority to Amundsen, who was another explorer. I think he was Swedish, I'm not sure, a longtime rival who he knew would be arriving days later. So there was kind of a race to explore the North Pole, or to document, maybe fly over or whatever. And so the fact that he didn't drop those flags for many of them is like kind of like a mission failure. Another thing is, when the question is asked, is the diary of Admiral Byrd real? The authenticity of Admiral Byrd's diary has been subject of debate. While skeptics argue that it may be a work of fiction or a misinterpretation of events, others believe it holds genuine accounts of his experiences. I'm one of those others. I believe personally, I believe it's true. But again, it's not like I can prove it, and it's definitely debatable. So, yeah.
Yeah, I want to read something. Well, first, before I read this short paragraph, I want to say that Admiral Byrd's account happened few decades after what
Yeah.
Olaf and his
Yeah.
father experienced.
The Smoky
Yeah.
God was before. Yeah.
Yeah. So Admiral Byrd is flying, and then he's seeing suddenly, like you said, instead of a land of snow and ice, he's seeing green parts, and he's saying that the temperature was showing 74 degrees Fahrenheit. And then he says this: ahead we spot what seems to be a city. This is impossible. The controls refuse to respond. And then he says, OMG, off our port and starboard wings of our port and starboard wings are a strange type of aircraft. They're closing rapidly alongside. They're disc-shaped and have a radiant quality to them. They're close enough to see the markings on them. It's a type of swastika, and he's yelling. He's putting so many exclamation marks.
Yeah.
We are caught in an invisible vice grip of some type. Our radio crackles, and a voice comes through in English with some perhaps in a slight Nordic or Germanic accent. The message is, welcome, Admiral, to our domain. We shall land you in exactly 7 minutes. Relax, you're in good hands. I note the engines of our plane have stopped running. The aircraft is under some strange control and is now turning itself. The controls are useless. So I want to just say this before I ask you, what do you think about this? Last week, I had my friend Sean, who him and I were talking about some supposed true eyewitness accounts when it comes to, different phenomena like Wendigo, Men in Black, and things of that sort. And then we were reading some eyewitness accounts of people who were dealing with Men in Black, and Men in Black were portrayed themselves as working for the government, of course, being dressed in black, had black limos. But the way they were described, they were everything but a human. They were just having a resemblance of a human, but they're not human. And one of the things is, if they would drive limo, they would try to surround you so you would stop. But the same way it happened to a pilot, and again, we discussed this last Sunday, so I'll just invite the audience who didn't see the episode to go and see it. But it happened to an American pilot when he was flying alone. He was surrounded by these disc-shaped aircrafts. They were like way superior to what American force had, and he was surrounded by them, and he was like almost like helpless. What is supposed to do? So when I read this report in your book, and when I remember assessing with my friend Sean last Sunday about Men in Black, or about these strange entities that have superior technology, I started immediately thinking, these beings, even though they may seem peaceful, do not seem as benevolent as people in Olaf's account, especially when they're addressing me with a foreign language. And I'm like, I mean, they speak English, and just like I, they have accents, and they have swastikas. Again, any sign, any symbol from the past can be misused, because what I read, for example, the pentagram wasn't always used as a cult symbol. It used to actually be a Christian symbol, pointing Jesus' head, arms, and legs. So in that regard, what do you think when it comes to this beginning? Can we already start assessing and saying, okay, this sounds good, or this sounds scary?
Well, that initial encounter is, I would say it's more on the scary side. You're like, what's going on? But they are rescuing him, so we can't lose control of that. Don't forget his whole plane, the compasses, they went crazy. So everything was nuts, and he was losing control, and he was not in control at this point. So they kind of come aside alongside him, and they help him navigate, but they override the controls, and they're taking control of it. So that can be a scary component of it. But they do tell him to relax, and then he's welcomed later. So obviously, Byrd, having been made familiar with World War II, was filtrating this information with the eyes and the experience that he has of what happened on the surface world. So he's seeing these swastikas, he's hearing a slight Germanic accent. So yeah, obviously he would jot that down as something that struck him, because it is striking. I mean, what's going on? Am I in German territory? Are these Nazis who just have incredible technology? Obviously he was trying to wrap his mind around what was happening, because a lot was happening in this a short space of time, losing control, seeing grass, seeing woolly mammoths, seeing flying UFO type vehicles. Any man would have a hard time grasping the whole situation, and it must have been going 100 miles an hour in his head. So yeah, at first he must have been quite scared. I would have been scared, but he was an army man. He was a Navy an experienced soldier, an explorer. So he probably handled it a lot better than I would have.
Yeah, I can still say that despite all of your experience, when you're facing something that you never faced before, your body, your mind have to be in some state of shock.
Yeah.
Maybe not to the point when you're paralyzed and can't move, but still you're like trying to logically decipher what is happening before your eyes. I think I would do the same. So in some way, okay, I don't have to say I'll be guarded. We will be all guarded because this is the unknown, but still, regardless of your experience and the way how you can be prepared, I think that all of us will go through some sort of a shock. And then he starts describing some of their technology, which reminds me a little bit of Olaf's accounts. He says that again, they have advanced technology. They had radios. The door was lifting silently upward. I'm like, man, this is like sci-fi TV shows we've been watching in the last couple of decades.
Yeah.
Then his host is telling him, have no fear. You're about to see the master. I'm like, okay, the master. That we still don't know. And then he said something that honestly I didn't like. He says, we have let you enter here because you're of a noble character and well known on the surface world, Admiral. You are in the domain of Ariani. Okay, Ariani, the inner world of the earth. This is pages 97 and 98. And they're described as blonde people. So blonde people with German accent,
Ariani. Yeah.
And I'm like, dang it, this is like so much like the German Nazi propaganda that Aryans, people with blue eyes and blonde hair, were superior to others. And this is where, for me, my
knee-jerk reaction, right?
Yes, my reaction and my gut feeling is telling me these are not the same people or not the same entities that Olaf saw, and I don't trust these people based on everything explained so far. I don't like. Why are you blonde and speak German, have swastikas, and you're called Ariane? It's like, could it be, if they exist, that because Hitler and the Germans in the World War I and II, they were like heavily into the occult. Could it be they got some ideas or were in touch with supreme race like this one? But according to this account, Admiral Byrd testifies that these people actually summoned Admiral Byrd to tell him, hey, so far what you had in the war, including the nuclear bomb you dropped on Japan, it's nothing about what is coming. We're summoning you here so you can go back to the leaders of the world and tell them we've been trying to contact you for years and decades, and to tell you to be more peaceful and to stop. So what they think about this, I mean, I know that inevitably someone will say, oh yeah, they're good guys. But I mean, we know, including from the Bible and from the real life experiences, that the Satan or the enemy, we can use any term we want to use, they can come up with all these beautiful things, courtesy, gifts, knowledge, kindness, supposedly empathy for people until their real side is shown. So even though their agenda is supposedly want to stop wars and have peace on earth, for some reason I don't trust them, and I don't know if you share the same feeling.
Uh, well, yes and no. But I understand absolutely what you're saying, what you're conveying. They are more ambiguous than the beings in the Smoky God, which are clearly benevolent. These seem a little bit more aloof, like, okay, we're gonna give you a pass, we're gonna accompany you, you're gonna meet the master. And that, when I read that, it reminded me of New Age philosophy, where they have ascended masters again, and oftentimes their ascended masters have what? Blonde hair, blue eyes, they look Aryan oftentimes. So I saw some of that stuff in there. Now that doesn't mean, see, all again, when we read stuff like that, we right away have our own lens through which we look at it. Our own lens tells us what? That the swastika is Nazi, that Aryans is Nazi, and that's bad. But don't forget, there's a lot also of newspaper propaganda that we've been submitted to throughout the years and decades that also has skewed our understanding of what really truly happened in World War II. Now, I'm not saying Hitler is a saint, or I'm not saying anything like that, but there are things that we just don't know. So where did the Nazi fascination by not Nazi, but the Aryan fascination by the Nazi, where did that come from? The swastika, why did they adopt that symbol? There's all kinds of conjecture about that. So that doesn't mean that all blue-eyed, blonde-haired beings are wicked, or else we'd have to nuke Sweden, right? So, so the point is, we have to try to look at it from a little more detached perspective than what we're familiar with when it comes to these symbols, when it comes to people like that, when it comes to Germanic accents and stuff like that. Now we have Klaus Schwab, who has a thick German accent, and right away we think Dr. Evil. So again, there's this, Germans are evil creeping up on our psyche, and it's always there. So, but we have to be careful not to let it skew our analysis when reading a book like, or an account like Admiral Byrd's. In the end, when all is said and done, are they more ambiguous? Yes, they are a little bit more ambiguous. They seem to be a little bit more doing their own thing, kind of like we're letting you in, but we're keeping you on the outside looking in a little bit. It's a little bit more like that, the account with Admiral Byrd. But they're still kind to him, gracious, and they send him on his way out, back safely and everything. So there's that. And Admiral Byrd himself said, there's an interesting quote where he says, let me try to find this here. I thought that was fascinating. He says, what people think about you is not supposed to matter much, so long as you yourself know where the truth lies. But I have found out, as have others who have moved in and out of newspaper headlines, that on occasion it can matter a good deal. For once you enter the world of headlines, you learn there is not one truth, but two. So that's I put that in the first page of the book. The one which you know from the facts, and the one which the public, or at any rate a highly imaginative part of the public, acquires by osmosis. And it's interesting that Byrd included that quote in his narrative of the diary of his encounter with this civilization. I thought it was interesting. It's like he's basically saying, don't believe everything you read in the papers. There's another truth that we're not really acquainted with. And I think he was trying to convey that when he wrote what happened in his diary. I don't know how you feel about that, but yeah.
I want to mention a couple of details, and we're almost done. When he's summoned before the so-called master with capital M, this master speaks to him as my son. And then he gives him the message and sends him back in the world. And I'm thinking, this reminds me of the biblical narrative. Many times prophets are summoned or told directly by God, like, I have a message for you, and God would usually, address a prophet as, his own son, or a faithful servant. So there is certain endearment. So there is endearment here, and
Yeah,
then God will tell the prophet, "You have a message," and this guy is also giving Admiral Byrd a message, and then send him in a way in the same fashion that God will send prophets. So I'm not in any shape or form saying that this master, if it exists, is prophet or represents God or serves God Yahweh. I don't know any of these things. Again, this is a all big what if, right? We don't
yeah,
know. But I'm just saying in this last portion before he's sent back home,
yeah.
uh, there's this the way of business is being conducted.
It's
Like, okay, I
more
call
red
you my
flag.
son. Yeah, yeah. I give you the message and I send you. I'm like, this is in the same way God of the Bible would send his prophets, to do the business and send the message. It just reminds me.
Yeah, absolutely. But on the conversely, like you mentioned earlier, there's a little bit more red flags in this narrative where we're not fully certain of the benevolence and the intentions of these people. So yeah, but still, I would still give them a pass in the sense that no, they didn't come after his family later. They didn't they didn't hurt him or in any way that I know of. So it's an interesting account for sure.
Yeah, and this first account that Admiral Byrd had in 1947 ends with him being told through the radio message at 2:15 p.m. when he's told by his host Auf Wiedersehen, which in German should mean something like goodbye. I'm like, I just don't like all of this German background and context. And this is in 1947. He goes back. He gives briefing to his superiors. And what I learned from this book that was supposedly 1960s classic, which I cannot recommend because first I didn't read it. Second, um, in the introduction, which was written 2008 or 9, and then the book was republished, we learned a lot about the sketchy and shady characters of this author called Dr. Raymond Bernard, and that was not even supposedly his real name. So again, I can recommend this only to people who love researching and who are curious, but do not expect to draw many truths from this. So in that context, I don't feel comfortable recommending this book. But from the chapter I read is that Admiral Byrd in 1956 managed to get support from the American government and army. Went back with a lot of other pilots and co-pilots, and this time they covered the bigger area. From what I remember in the first account, which we just read in 1946, they managed to cover an area of 1,700 miles. In the second account, they went and they covered the area of 2,300 miles. So overall, they covered, which the second book mentions, an area of 4,000 miles, and that's like big, like the whole, maybe even bigger than the whole continent of North America. And what they explain is this is not on the surface of the earth, but somehow there is an entry, a portal, or a gate around the North Pole, which leads you in the inner earth, and these 4,000 miles of uncovered, undiscovered land where it's like green, everything is green, everything is blossoming, trees are huge, animals are huge, people could be huge. That this is actually 4,000 miles or more of the area. It's underneath the earth, but supposedly around the North Pole is the entrance or one of the entrances. So in 1956, Admiral Byrd goes back, and we were not told too much what happens then, as it
Yeah.
much I mean, even in 1947, so nine years before when he went for the first time, we don't know too much except what we learned through this supposed secret diary. But I wish we learned more what happened second time.
Yeah.
Eventually, Admiral Byrd died, and what I read again in this book, which I don't know if I can recommend because it's filled with so many conspiracies and unchecked data, is that the material that he was talking about, the Admiral Byrd, even though it was covered by newspapers, when someone tried to publish, suddenly that was trying to be covered up, and then even though the millions of people back in the days knew about this event, they eventually, supposedly by the propaganda would try to be silenced by not spreading this material so that everyone would eventually forget that this even happened. And I don't know if this is true. I just read today and yesterday by, the supposed Dr. Raymond Bernard. If this is true, then it's like, it's suspicious and makes you think, well, who and why would they want to forbid this? If it's true, then, could there be something? Because I'm always referring back to that saying, if there is a smoke, there is a fire. Like, could
Yeah.
there be something? I don't know, but I'm interested to learn more about this second account of Admiral Byrd that happened 9 years later.
Yeah, which is probably if they did find more, they would have kept it even more secret, because at the end of this account that we have here, he is ordered. It says at the end log entries, it says that um, the president has been advised, I am now detained for several hours, 6 hours and 30 minutes to be exact, 39 minutes to be exact. I am interviewed intently by top security forces. So that's when he gets back to America, and a medical team. It was an ordeal. And I think he put like 5 exclamation points. I am placed under strict control via the national security provisions of this United States of America. I am, and then he writes in capital letters, I am ordered to remain silent in regard to all that I have learned on the behalf of humanity. Incredible, he writes. I am reminded that I am a military man and I must obey orders. So he wrote it down in his diary, but he never spoke of it. And the diary was discovered much later once he was dead. So I think that's very interesting, how they basically told him to shut up. And I don't know if he says everything. Did they threaten him? I don't know. It's usually their tactic, but I don't think they probably didn't need to, because like he says, they reminded him he's a military man and he's under a chain of command and he needs to obey orders. But that's how he closes the account, which is interesting.
Sebastien, I know that we went over 2 hours, even though we agreed about, hour and a half, hour and 40.
I hope it's okay with your audience. I'm more concerned with your audience than anything else, to be honest.
Yeah, I really enjoyed, and I just want to give you time for any concluding thoughts, like anything that you didn't mention, but that you think it could be important. And also, where can people find you, even though you did mention, and we can see your website, thrivingonpurpose.com. Anything you wanna share in the concluding thoughts.
Yeah, well, I haven't been super active on the website lately. My efforts and energy and time have been put more towards writing than anything else. So if you guys want to get a good copy of the book, you just go on amazon.com.ca.uk, wherever you're at in the world, and you can find it there. So it's The North Pole and Inner Earth Chronicles by Sebastien Richard. Actually, not by me. Actually, I actually gave the authors. Me, I just put myself as an editor or something, or co-author. But yeah, it's by Admiral Byrd and Willis George Emerson that they're going to find the book. And also, if they're interested in the Book of Enoch, I also published a copy of the Book of Enoch. I think I have it here. I can show it. So that's the copy of the Book of Enoch that I have published. If ever they're interested in that too, we spoke of it a little bit during the show. A very good 14-point font. I published a large print version because I thought it would be something that people would appreciate, and they have. I've had some good comments about the print, the font size, so people have appreciated that. And that's about it for now. If they want to follow, go see my past teachings, past podcasts that I did at Thriving on Purpose. They can find Thriving on Purpose on YouTube, and they can go on the website as well, thrivingonpurpose.com. And they can friend me on Facebook if they'd like this podcast.
I just want to thank the audience and kind comments, because they don't always come as kind. Sometimes people, for whatever reason, want to attack my guests. So I'm thankful that didn't happen tonight.
I'm thankful too.
Yes. I'm thankful for your time, everyone. Again, for your time, Sebastien, too. I hope we will continue working in the future again, because I think we'll have tons of good topics to cover together. And yeah, again, I just want to encourage audience, please like, subscribe, share these videos, It
Absolutely.
doesn't cost you anything except for a few seconds of your time, but it can help us with the YouTube and social media algorithm. We have little over 400 subscribers, which is a modest number, but still for 11 months, I guess I can't expect too much. I make no money out of this. I cover everything by working full-time job. So this takes toll on my time and energy and body, but I enjoy it and I'm not complaining. And I would also, encourage all of you to go and support brother Sebastien and his books. He also has fictional books and novels that are getting amazing reviews on Amazon. So if you can, please support him. And I would just encourage, like I try always to encourage my audience, be open-minded, not to the point where you would just accept anything, not to the point where you see clearly that God is telling you through the Holy Spirit, no, this is evil, this is nonsense, this is completely anti-biblical. I'm not telling you go and read and explore, try just anything. No, that would be not wise. But I'm just telling you, because God gave us minds and brains to use, to learn more, to try to connect the dots, to glorify Him, to be the ones who are always learning and never stopping, and then teaching the younger generations who are coming behind us. I just want to encourage everyone to never stop learning, never be satisfied. There's always more and more and more. And just, whenever you get a few bucks, you can always buy some secondhand books and just enjoy the material. And then that book should lead you to buy and want to learn more of other material that you never know how important they will be and what mystery from the Bible or life it can reveal or fill in the blanks which you never understood. So this is my final word for today. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, brother. We shall all see you next time. God bless.